So thank you everyone for getting together. We're getting folks logged in. We have a 3-hour webinar planned, and I realize people are going to come and go. We have it split up in 2 different sessions. My name's Woutrina Smith. I'll be one of your hosts. Keith Martin is with us in spirit, but happens to be on a plane right this second. So I'll be giving the initial remarks and helping us stay on track here. The first hour and a half session we have planned here is going to focus a little bit on the economics and framework of the triple environmental crisis or the planetary crisis. We're also going to talk about nature-based solutions in different contexts. So we've got some wonderful panelists here that will be with us. We'll have Dr. Carrie Monahan, we'll have Dr. Chris Overhash, we'll have Pushpam Kumar sharing thoughts in this initial panel. And we'll have some short presentations, and then we'll be saving time for discussion. So feel free to jot down questions or ideas as we go along. We're going to make sure that we have time for some moderated panel discussions and also for audience Q&A. So we would love to have your participation as we go along. We will take a little bio break in the middle there, and we'll come back for a second half of this. And so the value proposition will be a little more of a focus in the second part, and Dr. Carlos Faerron will be moderating that piece of it, and we'll be able to have both Mark Neuenhausen and Jonathan Patz and Catherine Machalaba as panelists sharing their thoughts in that second part. So there's just a little orientation for what we're doing here. And we will have the speakers be able to share their slides and run through some initial ideas, about 10 minutes per person, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'll give us a little bit of an orientation and then pass it over from there. So for anyone who has not really thought about what is this triple environmental crisis or triple planetary health crisis, we're thinking about how the different factors related to climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution all come together in ways that are stronger together than they are separate, in a negative impact in most contexts. And so a lot of folks have been hearing about this in recent years. We find that these trends are continuing, and that's really what brings us together today. What can we do to be able to chart a path forward that makes sense for the communities that we work in? So of course I got on the internet yesterday and have been seeing these kinds of alerts coming in over the past few days for me. So many of us on the west coast of the United States have had rains coming in the past day or two. The days prior to that, it was up in Alaska. And so Typhoon Halong is something that has been wreaking havoc in a place where I'm from. I grew up in Alaska, and these are pictures of the storm and the search and rescue and the houses washing away that have been happening just in the past couple of days. And so just wanting to raise awareness that sometimes we talk about these ideas as if they're theoretical, and we're seeing more and more that they are coming to be a reality. And we want to think about how can we come together in ways that will motivate change, both recognition of what's happening and why, and how can we work together more effectively to be able to keep things going, adapt, and mitigate. So the triple planetary crisis or triple environmental crisis is something that has certainly been coming out strong from the UN. And I liked this particular quote really because it recognizes not just that we have problems that we should talk about, but really we want to be thinking about what do we do to make things better. And so in this particular quote, the truth is we've been poor custodians of our fragile home. Today, the Earth is facing a triple planetary crisis: climate disruption, nature and biodiversity loss, pollution and waste. This triple crisis is threatening the well-being and survival of millions of people around the world. The building blocks of happy, healthy lives, clean water, fresh air, a stable and predictable climate, are in disarray, putting the SDGs in jeopardy, but there is hope. And I think that's really what motivates me to keep going on these different areas of work, even though they're so complex, because we really need to try and tackle them and to work together to innovate and find solutions. Okay, I think folks can see my screen, and I'll be a little bit brief to make sure we can shift over here. So one of the recent reports that was including some of the planetary health crisis issue was recognizing what are the problems, but also what can we do to find solutions. And so I just would refer folks to some of these different literature pieces if you'd like more information beyond what we have time to share today. Because we like triples, right? Triple environmental health crisis, just another triple here to plant as a seed for motivation. A lot of the businesses that we might be working with or organizations are thinking about where does the triple bottom line come into play? And so that's looking at the combination of social progress, environmental stewardship aspects, and economic growth. So it's a different triple than what we've talked about in the motivation of having this webinar, but wanting to just mention that as another term that you'll hear out there, which is complementary, I would say. For me, I would say I like to think globally and act locally. And if we all do that, then we make a difference in our own communities that hopefully adds up. So this is our ranch. This is an area where we've partnered with the Natural Resources Conservation Service to restore an overgrazed watershed. A lot of different groups were involved in doing this. Dr. Monahan is one of the folks who was instrumental in making these types of things happen. And we've seen really amazing changes with regard to the headwaters of the State Water Project. So these beaver dam analogs that you can see here is one example of a restoration method that's coming into play. We are doing research on these different things to say what's working and what's not. And here you can see on the right-hand picture what it looks like essentially before you do restoration in this type of high Sierra setting. And you can see on the left what happens after a few years of actually the restoration at work, keeping the cattle out of the creeks, being able to motivate and have a better sponge effect to release water throughout the year. So there are a lot of nature-based solutions that we are finding can be applied and have a lot of benefits that we can measure. The partners we have around the world are instrumental. And so if we think globally and act locally, we have the ability to inspire change in many places. There are One Health University networks in Africa and Southeast Asia, Afrihoon and Siahoon, that have united over 100 universities, really with this idea of a One Health approach or a transdisciplinary approach. The North American version of a One Health University network is something we're exploring and trying out even now, following in the footsteps of what USAID originally funded in some of our important regions of the world. So I'm going to end the framing remarks here with just recognizing that together we can all make this global network of innovators, of One Health professionals, of folks who care about the health of the individual people, animals, plants, and especially the environment that connects us all. So wanting to set that as the stage that other panelists can build on as we go forward. And with that, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Pushpam Kumar. He is coming to us from the UNEP program, where he's involved in many different things. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit today about some of his ideas related to the economics of the triple environmental crisis. So I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to Dr. Kumar to share his thoughts. Welcome. We can see in your spotlight, you're all set.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Woutrina. And you gave a wonderful introduction and set the tone of what I could have said. So when we talk about triple planetary crisis, as Woutrina you mentioned, climate, loss of nature, growing pollution, including chemicals and plastics, these are loosely they are referred as triple planetary challenges or crises or areas for concern. Now, that is one, and each of them have a problem. Woutrina, you mentioned about the extreme events, but we know the heat waves. We also know drought, flood, and a range of problems, including human health. They are being caused by the change in weather or heat. We also know that we are not going to be within 1.5 degree Celsius, most likely we would cross 2.5 as business, as per the business as usual as of now. Second is nature loss, and we know that IPBES suggests that 1 million species are under the risk of extinction every year, and that is very serious. Of course, loss of mangrove, wetlands, water bodies, and many other things in the domain of nature is a serious challenge. Not to mention about deforestation, erosion of topsoil, depletion of groundwater in various parts of the world on a different scale. The third part is the chemicals. The good thing is, like IPBES or IPCC, there is an intergovernmental panel now. So that's a good news. The countries of the world are recognizing the problems coming from the chemicals, the production, distribution, and end use of the chemicals. Similarly, the single-use plastics, their impact on human health, not only cardiovascular diseases, but also neurotoxins, and many other sectors. Now, but on the other hand, in the morning, there was a media briefing by IMF, and all is not bad. I mean, the growth is happening, measured through GDP, and various regions of the world are showing good rate of growth. And you have emerging economies like China, Brazil, Russia, Nigeria, Turkey, India, where the growth is showing up. And we also know from various scientific assessments that Homo sapiens and our production, consumption, and also distribution largely depend upon nature or the planetary health. So if we depend on them, why our planning, the growth, performance is not able to capture them? Where is the problem? And some of the problems are well written, well documented, that the system, the mechanism which takes care of what aspects deserves how much is not happening. So environmental attributes and the contributions are not captured, not assessed, not quantified, not monetized. Largely, I'm not saying 100%, but they are not. And one of the concept or the approach which has come up in last few years, and even in the political sphere, that concept is taken very seriously, is called natural capital. So all the environmental goods and services, including the services like maintenance or regulating, they are essential attributes of the capitals, and they are called natural capital. This was outside the domain of production boundary and assets classification of conventional economics. And so there is a disjunct. So one side is growing at the cost of others, and we are feeling that we are doing good. But we are not doing good because we are destroying the assets. And in the double bookkeeping system, the accounting system is unable to take note of that asymmetry. And that's why, although we are consuming much better, we are traveling more, we are doing everything which satisfies the material needs and demand and desire, but at the same time, we know that we are how much billion tons of carbon we are pumping into atmosphere every year. We also know that the 7 to 9% of the GDP is being lost as a loss to human capital due to falling or increasing mortality and morbidity rate, the public health. So how to bring the nature or natural capital into the metrics and measurement of conventional economics, where decisions are taken every day, every hour. In the multilateral trust bank, like World Bank or IMF or Asian Development Bank or African Development Bank, and National Treasury, Federal Bank, Development Ministry, Ministry of Finance. These uh, sectors uh, must recognize the contribution of nature. And that is where one of the things which is very, very on the high priority in the UN system, including UNEP, in UNEP, that how to move beyond GDP. So GDP, to measure performance and progress and prosperity, GDP alone is not very reliable and credible, point number one. Second, how in the fiscal, monetary, and trade policies, natural capital should be embraced, integrated, and it should become a part and parcel of decision-making framework. So that is another strand of work where in if we integrate natural capital and nature, I think we have better chance to tackle planetary crisis. The third is whether it is trade, whether it is employment, whether it is when we are measuring nature, we are talking, you mentioned Woutrina, nature-based solution. We have to see what is their employment elasticity, what is their job creation potential, and how to orchestrate the economy where the win-win happens. Win-win means the nature is taken care of, and at the same time, the economy, which are struggling to have adequate growth, create jobs, they are taken care of. Now, I'm not saying that if we integrate, there will be always win-win. There could be a trade-off too. But then we have to organize, recognize the trade-offs rather than just ignoring them. Uh, on natural capital, once again, as our statistician friends and the economists, hard-boiled financial economists can always come out with the issues that, hey, where is the data? Where is the aggregation? Where is the assessment? Yes, there is a problem, and that is where, as a scientific community, as a passionate bunch of professionals, we have to have more work, more empirical, assessment, data creation, and also exchange of knowledge, exchange of information in the group like this one, basically creating a community of practitioners. So that is one, but also a there has to be a political mm, awareness, and as a group of scientists and students, we have to provide information in a way that decision makers, especially the politicians, find it hard to ignore it. And that's why we need to organize our communication better, very clear, compelling, and uh, simple. That is one of the surest way to convince politicians that action is needed, research is needed in this area if we really want to integrate nature, natural capital into decision-making framework of economics and finance. And if we do that, I think we have a better chance to succeed and tackle triple planetary crisis. Otherwise, it will be two banks of the river talking different things, and the meeting of the two banks will never happen. And when we meet the financial expert, the share market folks, macroeconomists, financial economists, they are not aware of the kind of problem we talk every hour in a webinar like this. So I think there is a lot of uh, integration work, mainstreaming work of nature into finance and economics need to be done. And if we do, Even if we succeed partially, we have better chance to integrate and tackle planetary crisis the way we have framed and the way you have, Woutrina, you have mentioned. I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. Wonderful to have you with us. We're going to move to our next panelist, but for those of you who have been thinking about the ideas Dr. Kumar was sharing, feel free to jot down questions or things you'd like to hear more about. We do have time for that. So let me make sure that we can be able to have this piece go away. And so for Dr. Carrie Monahan, a good friend and colleague, she'll be taking us into a deeper dive on some of her areas that involve nature-based solutions, and especially a nice role that she's come into working with some of the tribes and the interface to understand how we can do more together than we can do separately. So Dr. Monahan, I'm going to go ahead and give you the screen here so you can be able to share your slides if you would like and go forward from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Woutrina. It's really lovely to have joined you all here today. And I appreciate the big picture thinking. I think the presentation I've been asked to give today will be a case study of sorts, more think local and act global, but it certainly brings in some of the components that we just heard about, nature-based solutions, social, economic, and of course the metrics that we use to talk about them to communicate their impact. So I assume you can see the right portion of my screen right now. Is that correct?
You look good. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank
in
you.
your video. Yep.
Okay, great. So California Sierra Nevada mountain range is in many ways the headwaters of the state. The Sierra Nevadas provide 60% of California's developed water supply for more than 23 million people. And over the past 170 years, the Sierra Nevada has experienced mass resource extraction that really began with the California Gold Rush. The gold rush of the 1850s brought an influx of settlers to the region, and the result is that we now have poorly mismanaged forests, many degraded meadows, ongoing mining impacts, and the loss of place-based stewardship led by indigenous peoples. The nature-based solutions I'm going to discuss today are related to these land management activities: forestry, prescribed fire, meadow restoration, mine remediation, and Indian-led enterprises, and the role of networks, and the ways that they demonstrate ways of working with nature to manage nature. Much of what I cover is based on a case study for the Sierra Nevada led by Moortown Rancheria, a federally recognized Maidu tribe in Northern California. And I tried to relate the proposed activities to one common metric: tons of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestered or avoided amidst a myriad of co-benefits like habitat and benefits to communities. Fire is a natural and reoccurring ecosystem disturbance in the Sierra with a return interval for mixed conifer and pine of 11 to 15 years, meaning everything would burn every 11 to 15 years. Prescribed fire was historically used by indigenous peoples to reduce brush or fuels between trees, for better hunting and access, and also to avoid catastrophic events from lightning strikes. Many of the native plants in the Sierra are fire adapted and only germinate with fire. The combination of fire suppression to protect the growing built environment, the decline of the timber industry and local mills, and a changing climate has led to some of the most destructive fires in history. Northern California is really ground zero to a new era of catastrophic megafires. These fires take hold and devastate the land, wildlife, soils, air quality, and communities, leaving soils devoid of life and regeneration of forests in question. In 2018, the Camp Fire destroyed the town of Paradise and took 85 lives. The North Complex Fire killed 15 and destroyed 2,500 structures. The Dixie Fire was nearly 1 million acres, and it's the largest fire in California history. And while the tribe has cultural and economic purposes for forest management, it's also a matter of necessity. In order for good fire to be the norm again, a huge backlog of forestry must take place, including extensive fuels reduction, timber harvest, economic development for local rural communities, and prescribed fire. Since the California Air Resources Board began enforcing the low carbon fuel standard in 2011, approximately 320 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent have been avoided. This reduction is primarily the result of displacing conventional diesel and gasoline with cleaner alternatives, including renewable diesel, biofuel, and other low carbon fuels. In addition, California's cap and trade program has contributed to the reduction of approximately 5.2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. However, California Air Resources Board attributes 22 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent released in the Camp Fire, 40 million metric tons released from the North Complex Fire, 137 million metric tons released from the Dixie Fire, 88 million metric tons released from the Park Fire, a total of 287 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over 6 years, or 48 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. Our carbon credits are literally going up in smoke. This image shows the forest treatments that were applied to different areas and the condition of the forest after fire. No treatment led to the greatest intensity burn. Thinning only still resulted in a crown fire that killed the large trees. But the thinning and prescribed burn treated area was able to survive fire and will likely regenerate. If we want our forests to survive in a changing climate, their active management is paramount. High elevation wet meadows occupy a relatively small proportion of most watersheds, usually less than 3% of the total land area, but they have more than 50% of the biodiversity. There's 77,000 hectares of high elevation wet meadows in the Sierra Nevada, and 40 to 60% are degraded or in need of restoration. Research indicates that 1 acre of healthy meadows can sequester as much as 6 acres of forest. Conversely, degraded meadows can experience up to a 50% loss in soil organic carbon content due to vegetation and moisture loss, highlighting the importance of restoring and maintaining these ecosystems. Intact wet meadows can sequester carbon at rates ranging to 50 to 578 grams of carbon per square meter per year. The higher end of this range is among the most elevated carbon accumulation rates observed outside of mangrove swamps. Estimated annual carbon sequestration for Sierra Nevada wet meadows is 140,000 to 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. The 40 to 60% of meadows that are degraded can be restored using process-based restoration, which means restoring the function that supports and sustains the ecosystems we depend on. This involves 3 main components: addressing human impacts and constraints such as removing infrastructure, sometimes using heavy equipment to do so, to create as large an area as possible for natural habitat forming fluvial processes to occur. 2, working with nature to heal nature means that the in-stream work may be extensive, but it relies on stream energy and natural materials and has a small carbon and disturbance footprint. In this case, beaver dam analogs raise water tables to the surface of the floodplain and encourage side channel formation and sediment deposition. Over time, fluvial energy, sediment, and vegetation develop a complex multi-channel system. And third, the third component is creating a community of stewardship with networks such as the Sierra Meadows Partnership, the California Process-Based Restoration Network, and others, so that we can create a restoration economy with opportunities for jobs in rural areas. The engineering feats of the gold rush include an estimated 6,000 miles of ditches, the nation's largest reservoirs, and some of the country's most productive gold mining operations in the Sierra. There was $300 million worth of gold produced by California hydraulic mining within 3 decades. An estimated 1.6 billion cubic yards of debris washed down into rivers, into the Sacramento Valley farmlands and beyond to the Bay. And today, California has more than 40,000 abandoned mines. Hydraulic mining, where hydraulic monitors are used to power wash away the soil, from 1849 through 1875, destroyed 1 million hectares of Sierra Nevada natural habitat. Today, hydraulic mine impacted acres continue to have high erosion rates, poor soils, stressed vegetation, and send massive amounts of turbid discharge downstream during storm events. These mine-impacted areas offer a huge opportunity for nature-based solutions, not just to reduce fire severity by improving the health of the vegetation or improving the water quality discharged from these sites, but providing erosion control, but also by adding biochar as a soil amendment and sequestering carbon. Biochar is a charcoal-like substance made from the excess biomass removed during fuel reduction activities from the non-merchantable materials, which are pyrolyzed in a low oxygen environment, creating a carbon-rich substance that can be added to soil. Spreading 5 inches of biochar over 1 hectare, we sequester roughly 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and our field studies show improved soil health and water quality from biochar application as well. Hydraulic mine remediation in the Tahoe National Forest could sequester 1.27 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and across the Sierra could sequester 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So what we're talking about here is integrated forest health, where prescribed fire, meadow restoration, and mine restoration are seen as part of basic forestry practices. Nature-based solutions for headwater ecosystems include reduced fuel loads and prescribed fire, which would reduce carbon emissions from catastrophic fires, reducing 48 million metric tons of carbon dioxide a year, followed by meadow restoration, which can sequester 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year and provide many habitat benefits, and hydraulic mine restoration with biochar, which offers 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide sequestration opportunity and provides soil health, vegetation, and water quality benefits. I think the question is not what do we do, but how do we do it? As an Indian economic enterprise, tribes are able to do work on Forest Service lands using interagency agreements, not just grants and contracts, but work for the government as part of the government. This has many efficiencies, avoids bureaucratic delays, administrative overhead fees, and ensures that the limited resources get spent on the land management itself. Our tribe has a large forestry department with growing capacity. To treat more than 3,000 acres a year of federal land that have dangerous fuel loads, and we are growing our prescribed fire program. Our tribe participates in multiple networks, including an annual process-based restoration training for meadow restoration, and has 12 meadows in the planning phase for restoration in the next 2 to 5 years. And our tribe is exploring making biochar and using it on hydraulic mine impacted acres. We have 5 hydraulic mine projects that are ready to proceed. As a part of these networks, we have access to experts to answer questions about permitting, proposals, crew development, and more. We welcome your support and offer our lessons learned to any who are interested in pursuing similar nature-based solutions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Monahan. Inspiring as always. I would invite folks who have been kind of taking this in to, jot down a couple thoughts in the chat box now or for when we do some Q&A. There's a lot to follow up on, both with regard to characterizing the problems, but even more so in how do we do this to have process-based restoration and nature-based solutions in ways that make sense for the economics as well as for the communities. So thanks so much for that. We have one more panelist who has been invited to share some introductory thoughts. Let me see if I can find a proper way to introduce Chris. So Chris Overcash is our next speaker. And he's coming to us from Johns Hopkins University, from the engineering space. And we'll really look forward to hear what he has to say about some of the ideas in restoration, nature-based solutions, but more in a coastal context as compared to some of the mountain context, which is where I first met Dr. Monahan. So Chris, you are welcome to share your screen here.
Yes,
and
thanks.
We'll get you going.
Thanks so much, Woutrina.
Sure.
Let's see if we can get this shared for everybody. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be, everyone. So I'm gonna maybe be framing this discussion a little different in between Push Pam's 10,000-foot view and Carrie's on the ground single project discussion. I'm gonna kind of zero in on the coastal context for nature-based solutions, which is very poignant as you mentioned, Woutrina, with the flooding that's happening on a daily basis. So for this quick overview, I'm going to talk about what coastal climate impacts are and their repercussions, and then what coastal nature-based solutions are, why it's important in the coastal space, and then talk about what's happening in the research and implementation for these solutions. So coastal climate impacts. I think probably everybody on the call is going to understand it's not just sea level rise we're talking about. It's an intersection of sea level rise with storm surge and precipitation causing sort of worst case scenario in the flooding context. If a hurricane is pushing up the coast, there's also going to be rain associated with it. So how do you design a system that's going to protect against those kind of items? And then, of course, besides that, obviously we're struggling with temperature increases and CO2 increases. Sea level rise is also accelerating due to the amount of carbon that's increasing in the atmosphere. So it's another thing to keep in context. So it's past is not prologue. If you look 150 years in the past, it's almost been a linear increase in sea level, but that's not what's going to happen as we move into the future. So it makes it more challenging. So what are these impacts causing? More intense storms, associated erosion, flooding, and inundation, ocean acidification because of the CO2 increase, which is causing ecosystem damage in a lot of different feedback loops. And I won't get into all those for this short discussion, but coral reefs are at the forefront there, suffering bleaching due to acidification and temperature. And then, of course, biodiversity loss is also associated with that. So the repercussions of that. So, some of these are going to be pretty obvious: damage to built infrastructure, destroyed structures that we're seeing on a daily basis, but it's also causing damage to natural systems. So one of the things for the context there is the drowning of coastal wetlands that can't keep up with sea level rise. The natural process is those wetlands are supplied with sediment that in the past they could keep up with moderate changes in sea level, but what we're experiencing now is threatening to cause mass drowning of these systems if we don't do anything as we go later into the century. And with all those items, we're seeing displacement of populations, human and ecological, having to move from these coastal zones. Fishery impacts, again, feedback loops causing some crashes to fisheries in the coastal zone, which is leading to food insecurity for coastal human populations. A variety of health impacts due to temperature increases and then loss of those ecosystem functions. And I guess long story short here, massive ecological and economic disruptions. Some economists are saying up to $14 trillion of impacts by the year 2100. That is estimated to be about then $95 billion per year at that point in time. Those are both attached to worst case scenarios of carbon emissions. And then last item on the list there, up to 75 million displaced persons by the year 2100. So a bleak discussion to this point, but wanted to change tack at this point and talk about one of the great stories as we move into the future of how to combat those impacts. So nature-based solutions, as we heard Carrie talking about in an upland system, but obviously there's ways to use nature-based solutions in all sorts of environments. So they, generally speaking, you can see on the slide here, strategies that use natural processes and ecosystems to address resilience, environmental, societal, and economic challenges. And there are a lot of different names that are associated with these strategies, and I'm not going to read all those on the slide. So, one of the common ones you'll hear green infrastructure discussed. That's associated with usually infiltrating precipitation and stormwater. Also, I'll point out a main point here that these systems are designed by technical teams of engineers, scientists, landscape architects, planners, as well as a wide variety of other specialists, social scientists, looking at, Carrie mentioned talking with the population using traditional ecological knowledge of populations that have experienced some of these impacts in the past is very important to be able to, when you design these systems, to make sure it integrates with the folks that live in these areas on the ground. So next slide here, just a quick overview of nature-based solution examples in the coastal zone. Living shorelines is a term that I think folks will be have heard before. Wetland restoration, things like living reef or breakwater structures, land restoration and creation. You'd see example of that on the bottom left from an EPA project, and things like vegetated berms, which can provide resilience against those rising seas. And then example in the middle there, that's a restored wetland. And then another piece of context here is it doesn't have to be a completely vegetated system. You can see the transition of different elements that you could bring into some of these designs. So you might think of them as hybrid structures that may use vegetation and edging along with a bulkhead that is designed in such a way that it recruits vegetation and marine life. So again, those are referred to many times as hybrid structures. So just to back up one step here and just give you a very quick on-the-ground example of what a living shoreline design might look like and what it is meant to achieve. So in this case, we see this great graphic produced by the Army Corps Engineering with Nature program in 2021, but it has two different elements of this living shoreline. One is a living breakwater structure using concrete reef balls that's made to reduce wave impact during storms and regular episodes. And then behind it is a restored wetland that the actual plant structure itself helps to further reduce wave impact. So if there's items behind that wetland, such as housing structure or other natural features, they're going to be further protected by this combination living shoreline design. And so why implement nature-based solutions in the coastal zone? So we've already touched on a few of these already. Obviously, it's going to build resilience to that system. It also increases ecosystem services. So we're not just talking about a bulkhead without any elements attached to it. We're creating not only resilience, but a thriving ecosystem to be able to keep that inherent in the coastal space, which feeds right along with what Pushpam was discussing as far as natural capital. These also bring health benefits, unlike some of the traditional structural elements that we saw in the past. So take, for instance, if you created a coastal vegetated berm, you may also be able to design a walking path on top of that. So it allows public access to coastal elements and allows that population a place to recreate and to be able to walk and gather health benefits. Besides the fact that it stops direct flooding impacts to a community as well. And I'll also make note of the graphic here. I'm not going to read all the items. These are great infographics items that Noah put together a few years ago. So once the slide deck is shared, you can take a look at that. But one of the big items here is the cost benefits versus traditional structural solutions in the coastal zone. So one anecdote that we've seen many different places is that with a direct hurricane strike, sometimes built infrastructure such as seawalls or bulkheads can be completely destroyed by hits from hurricanes, when a restored wetland may be 100% functional the next day. After the floodwaters have retreated, that wetland is there ready to keep repelling wave force the next day. So, again, cost benefits, this has been analyzed for many years, and it's proving that these solutions are not just good for the environment, they're good for the economics of everything as well. So with that framing context in place, just wanted to kind of talk very briefly about what's going on the research and implementation side of coastal nature-based solutions. So first of all, there's already a track record of success in this frame. Some of these techniques have been employed for decades. I can say that, in recent years, there's been much more of a focus. Great organizations such as Army Corps Engineering with Nature have been focused on developing research and ways to implement these techniques more effectively since about 2012. And folks engaged in this, it's the whole range of different organizations, public, private, NGOs. Obviously, universities are a big part to play. I'm personally working with the Institute of Planetary Health at Johns Hopkins on coastal research elements and figuring out best ways to continue to implement those. I can say one of the other things that we're doing at Hopkins, as other universities are throughout the country, is engaging student design teams on the ground to actually develop these solutions. And so that's accomplishing two great things. It's and I hadn't brought this up before. We are definitely seeing a lack of practitioners that are knowledgeable about this. So the ability to develop the next generation is key, and then being able to engage students to become those future folks is very, very helpful. So whatever we can do in that space to again grow the next generation, so to speak, is going to be very helpful. So yeah, just to wrap up this quick summary, two key points to make here. Obviously, climate impacts are having profound repercussions in coastal areas, and nature-based solutions are providing significant opportunities to help turn the tide and prevent some of that damage. So thanks very much. Look forward to the open discussion.
Thanks so much, Chris. Okay, so we had some really insightful and wonderful opening remarks from our various panelists. We are going to go into some questions that have come through in the chat box and beyond. Others are welcome to add into that. The topic of this part of our overall triple environmental crisis webinar was focused especially on nature-based solutions and some of the economic aspects that we want to think about and why it makes sense to take action. So Drs. Kumar, Monahan, and Overcash really got us started in a very nice way. I have some questions noted here, and we'll be able to share them with the speakers, and we can be able to take more as we go along. So perhaps starting with Dr. Kumar, and others may have ideas to top up. But when we think about really the importance of universities, right? Some of us logging in today and joining this webinar are based at universities. Others are at organizations of various sorts all over the world. We want to think about, what's the role of universities as catalysts or as conveners or as think tanks? There's many different ways we might talk about it. But how can universities help to unite the public and private sectors in ways that would help us to pilot or implement solutions to some of these planetary health challenges, to build resilience in different ways, as we heard Chris just talk about. So Dr. Kumar, do you have any initial thoughts on the role of universities or what the priorities could be to unite the public and private sectors?
Thank you, Woutrina. No, university and colleges and academic institutions, they have a very big role to play here. Two role immediately. One is, of course, to create more evidence, more data, like Chris has just presented. We need this kind of compelling examples when we talk about nature-based solution. And you will find several UN resolutions and UNEP resolutions where governments of the world and the ministers, they come and they say yes, but they don't find much of evidence. So just to exemplify, we need more evidence, and university students young mind. University professors have a big role to play there. Second, when we gather evidence and when we have rich science, then we have to take it to the public. I understand university and colleges, they don't deal with public by and large. They publish their paper, they organize workshop, they do, professors write papers, they grow their positions, they have a tenure positions, they are happy, they go to some academic meeting, professional bodies, and that's all. But I think that is where we would request our colleague from university to reach out to the outside world, to engage with the people who matter the most in terms of actions, investment on the ground. And I think these two roles are very, very important. Finally, university students are young mind. They have right questions. So we must pay attention to what they are asking. And engaging with the young generations is the most fascinating, most productive, and most meaningful work in terms of managing triple planetary the crisis is concerned. I will stop, Woutrina.
Thanks so much. Dr. Monahan, anything you'd like to add on the role of universities?
I agree with everything Dr. Kumar just shared. Absolutely. I think the more evidence and more data that he might have been referring to links back to his earlier comment as well of how do we bring natural capital? How do we quantify the natural capital into metrics that can be shared across disciplines? And I think the universities have a great role to play in that as well, which gets back to how we communicate together and across regions so that these solutions become something that is scalable and we can learn from and make sense to politicians and educators alike. I mean, without a common metric, we don't know what we're talking about. It becomes, place-based solutions can become very provincial rather than an example that can be applied widely. So we need those metrics.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Carrie. Chris, anything you'd like to share with your thoughts? You have one foot in both worlds, I think. So perhaps a nice perspective to share.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Pushpam and Carrie has said already. But one of the roles that universities definitely need to play is educating the public about truly what nature-based solutions are, because I think there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about it. So we can be on the forefront of doing that, and also creating teams that link universities with the public. The private sector to accomplish the much needed resilience goals. I think it's going to, that's definitely one way that we can help solve that problem, and then also continue to bring in the perspective of natural capital. I'll just say that was my master's thesis 25 years ago, was hoping that we would get more traction on that, and I think it's more important than ever that we get that valuation correct, because the result of not doing that is not going to be good. So I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. Yes, Pushpam.
Just a brief comment. I hope, yeah. Both the case studies presented by Dr. Monahan and Chris, they are very fascinating, examples of nature-based solutions, their efficacy, their efficiency. Such studies must go outside the journal, outside the university lecture room. There should be a mechanism, and that is where a forum like this, where we are sitting and discussing, is so important, that we try to influence the institutions who matter in terms of public actions. And I think if you see the history of assessment, whether it is climate change, IPCC, or similar others, it takes time. Woutrina, there was a chat question that what makes me hopeful. I don't know what was the reference, but I understand what is the ulterior motive of asking this question. I mean, I don't find any alternative not to believe in science. There are countries, there are political regime, it is up and down. We should not get discouraged by that. And moreover, we work in the UN system, and I'm happy to share with you all, there is a majority of the countries, they believe in science. They want more science. They want more case studies to guide their actions on the ground. So maybe 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 countries out of 196 or 193, if they take a different course of action as a scientific group we should not get distracted. Maybe that country may be very strong, very powerful, but it is just a temporary phase. Science is there. I mean, see climate change, see biodiversity loss, see public health impact of chemicals and plastics. One can go all, this way or that way, but by and large, science is in agreement that yes, this is a real problem. So maybe somebody comes and say, oh, this is not a problem. I think I'm hopeful, I'm positive, and I'm happy to communicate to you all. When I see 190 ministers coming, I think most of them believe in what we are discussing here. So we should not get discouraged by some outlier examples. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Carrie, Chris, anything you'd like to add on what gives you hope? Certainly it's, a lot of big challenges here, and we need to get up every day and be able to continue to do our work and move forward. Anything else you'd like to add for the audience consideration? Maybe Chris first and then Carrie.
Yeah, no, I would just kind of reiterate some of the things that I just mentioned. I'm hopeful that with nature-based solutions, the sky's the limit. There's still a lot of research to be done. Besides my role at Hopkins, I'm also director of Strong Environmental for Resilience, and we're working closely with industry partners to try to advance those solutions as well. So it's not just in the public space. So it does give me hope that truly people understand, even though the rhetoric might not match it at some of the levels in the United States, people understand that this resilience is necessary and needed, and we're the team that's putting together those solutions as we move into the future.
Mm-hmm. Carrie?
I think the first time I heard this question asked at a talk, I was actually listening to Dr. Jane Goodall speak in Oregon, and someone asked her what gives her hope, and she said the resiliency of nature. And I have brought that to my forefront of my mind over and over and over again. There are so many things that we hopefully do not fully understand all of the way, and that resiliency and that unknown put together gives us a fighting chance.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so one of the questions that's come through in our chat box is a question a little more technical. I'm guessing that one of you all probably knows more about it than me, related to cloud seeding. So what is cloud seeding? Is that something that could be considered or should be considered more when it comes to fire and water management strategies? Would anyone want to take that on for a quick summary or thoughts in that space?
So I'm not an expert at cloud seeding, but generally what you're talking about is being able to put particles into the atmosphere that can help build clouds. But as far as developing that for some of these solutions, I guess that's the only item I'd add.
Okay, so something that could be looked into, but not a super strong, it's great, or we're not, it's not great for some reason. Okay. The one of the other questions that we had related to some of the presentation from Dr. Monahan was about biochar. Do you want to just comment briefly? I think you started to get at it in the chat box, but what is it? How should we think about it? It's a bit of a new term for some of us.
Yeah, biochar is an exciting one to learn about. It can be made with many different feedstocks, the material that you start with. It can be made with wood chips, forestry residue, crop waste, like the hulls or husks from crops, and manure. And it's essentially pyrolyzed or baking that material, so an incomplete burn. And it's done in a low oxygen environment, creating a very carbon rich material with many different binding sites. So it looks like charcoal. It's a little more dense than charcoal that we would use or buy from the store. And then it can be used many different ways. It's been used as a soil amendment for agriculture. And it's been used on abandoned mines for water quality benefit. So it's actually a filtration capacity. Sometimes people relate to biochar or activated carbon through their Brita filter. So when water passes through it, it's able to bind to particulates in that water. Part of the fuels reduction need that we have creates a lot of waste. And that waste material, so the brush and the forest residue, right now, it will get piled up and burned. That's better than a catastrophic fire taking hold and burning trees down, but we are still burning that material and putting it into the atmosphere. So creating something from it, use like biochar, and there's a couple of different ways can do this. This is not new tech. This is old, ancient tech. A lot of ancient peoples made biochar by digging pits into the ground and burying material into it after it's burned for a while and then using that as a soil amendment. Today we have things called like a char boss. It looks like a big storage or shipping container where things can be burned and put out at an incomplete state and then applied when cool again. So biochar, how we make it, how close we make it to where it's needed seems to be one of the most important factors to keeping it a really viable industry. But it allows us to sequester carbon in soil and rebuild soil, and that carbon will stay in that soil for thousands of years. So it's a very exciting carbon sequestration or nature-based solution. And I'd love to continue to see it applied in many different ways. Because what else are we going to do with all of that waste, right? We need to create something. And if we can create something that's part of an industry or can be used in these other ways, we're getting closer to that win-win-win component of jobs, of economy, and of sequestering carbon. It's really about a carbon budget. And that's the exciting part about biochar.
Thanks, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other questions that we have that's come through here, so what's the role of K through 12 schools or citizen science in documenting, piloting innovations involved with planetary health? Certainly that's one of the reasons we have these types of webinars, sharing inspiration and what's working or what can other people try in their communities that shows promise. So do we have any examples or thoughts from our panelists related to the role of the K through 12 school activities, perhaps, even extracurricular, I suppose, or citizen science on really being involved in these issues, not just the scientists, but the communities, making it feel like these solutions are their own and they're really empowered to be part of them. Who would like to kick us off here?
Sure, I can jump in first. So, yeah, I mean, and it goes along with, I guess, one of my first comments there is that we need to be the folks that are educating the rest of the population on nature-based solutions. And one of the best ways to do that is to engage with your grade school folks to let them know what technical folks do and how nature-based solutions can be part of that solution. Coming from an engineering perspective, I know that a lot of times younger people don't have any grasp on what engineers do. And if you can explain that in an exciting way, which is easy to do because engineers do exciting things, then you can, help grow that next generation of practitioners that I was talking about earlier. So, I mean, that's just one part of the discussion.
So a career path pipeline, as well as empowering them to be involved in the activities right then. I love that. Carrie, you had thoughts?
Sure. I just, part of the meadow restoration work that we've been doing involves building beaver dam analogs, which is a very low tech construction process. These are essentially ephemeral structures, so they don't require an engineering firm, if you will, but they make a great difference in the slowing the water, building sediment up behind them. And the more people, K through 12 included, that we can get into the meadows, building them with their hands, which literally means packing sod and weaving willow, it gives people that sense that they are part of a solution. And I think in today's age, kids hear so much about how we are doomed from social media and how many problems. And it's by getting outside and getting our hands in the dirt and doing something collectively as community, it really seems to wake people up and change their minds. And it's these local groups that essentially sustain or continue to maintain these meadow restoration projects, because they're not a one and done. They're a long-term investment in restoration. Like beavers living in a meadow, they would constantly restore those beaver dam analogs. And so you could have that same school group go out every year to repair beaver dam analogs and make sure they're still working and learn about how the meadows are recovering. So we have seen some of that through the Sierra Meadows Partnership, and Point Blue has led some of the youngest groups of school children out onto these meadows. It's really exciting to see.
Thanks, Carrie. Pushpam, anything you'd like to add? K through
No,
12 or citizen science type examples? Otherwise, I have one.
yeah, I mean, UN system and UNEP has a program to engage with school kids and the college students, and similar the things which both Kerry and Chris they have mentioned. So I endorse their each and every word.
Yeah, maybe one example to add from me that's slightly complementary. So I mentioned in my framing remarks that working with many people in the Africa One Health University Network and Southeast Asia One Health University Network was really rewarding and impactful. And over 60,000 people were trained in the One Health approach as part of that 5 or 6 year initiative where we were involved recently. So we saw the power of really scaling when it came to in-person and online educational formats. And that was actually with the pandemic as part of that. So that was a curveball that we were resilient around. The low cost, very inspiring piece of that program were the One Health clubs. So they would call them Student One Health Innovation Clubs in some of the regions, the CUGHs. And it was a way to work with, in that case, university students. But there's a parallel that I've seen happening at the K through 12 level as well. And those students, as we all know, right, they're enthusiastic, they want to do something. And so being able to have a way that they could get some ideas and get some guidance and mentoring on what could they do in the space of climate and health or global health security or outbreak preparedness and response or career paths that link to community needs, like whatever the piece was, they wanted to be involved and they could be very creative in the solutions they came up with, not just the technical areas, but how do we package the stuff that we already know is important in interesting ways for the communities. And so being able to work with One Health student clubs in different levels, different parts of the world, I think that that's an area where many, many folks could get involved pretty easily. Because they are the future generation. So we want them to be trained and motivated and involved. And if they're ready right now to do something, then they just need someone to kind of show them where to get involved and where to go from there. So hopefully we can really think about that for each of us in our place, professionally or personally. Are there ways that we could involve students or citizens in our communities in some of the activities? And hopefully that would have a bit of a snowball effect to really get more folks involved in these networks if that's of interest. I think that could be really helpful. We have about 5 minutes left in this session. So maybe we'll do one more set of questions that have come in here, and then we're going to take a little break before we go on to the second piece of the webinar. So if we look at steps for advancing adoption of some of these practices. I know certainly there's a question that came in just now about educational access. I have some thoughts on that. But also if we think about the nature-based solutions that Carrie and Chris both presented, that you have proof of concept. They look really promising. So are there steps to get the word out or to promote adoption, whether it's a top-down approach with policy or a bottom-up approach from the communities, Any tips or ideas that folks want to share related to how do we really help more of these promising interventions take place in different communities or different contexts? Chris, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So again, I think there's a lot of confusion out there about when you talk about what nature-based solutions are. So, for instance, there are organizations that are one of their main objectives is to get that education component out and not only advance the science. One of those is the Network for Engineering with Nature that's based in University of Georgia, and we're also doing it at Hopkins through the Institute for Planetary Health. But I think that is a major sticking point is the public doesn't really understand it. There are plenty, like I mentioned on my talk, there are decades worth of very successful implementation of these strategies. We just need to make people understand how effective they are, the cost benefits, and linking that with the ecosystem valuation, ecosystem services that these nature-based solutions also bring will add even more credibility to those solutions. So, yeah, and I think it needs to be both top down and bottom up in as much as we can.
Carrie, you want to add anything? How do we inspire adoption?
Sure, I think about this a lot. And so this is kind of the ecosystem of restoration that we're talking about, a human system, where we have money given from Congress for wildfire crisis recovery, for example, or we have a climate bond come through the state of California that supports these concepts, that supports how this work should get done. But how do we integrate this into jobs on the ground, right? And we have to remember that that money that gets dispersed goes into different agencies like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, that then puts out a request for proposals. This is another way universities can play a key role because who applies to these proposals are grant writers, not necessarily the same thing as restoration practitioners. So we need these grant writers to be writing these integrated projects and accessing this money for the local regions. And then using subcontractors to get the work done. So that could be a small restoration design group, or it could be a big engineering firm. And that's how it touches the ground with jobs, right? So in my mind, the jobs that we need are those entry-level positions. So the people who have maybe not quite gone to college yet or are just coming out of college and they want to know how they can get involved. And so we want to be able to find ways to include them in the restoration activities. I point to prescribed fire. I point to the firefighting suppression efforts that the Forest Service leads. I point to process-based restoration for meadows and beaver dam analogs when I'm saying these things. And the trainings that go out are often for the activities done by the practitioners, but we need trainings at these other levels of the ecosystem as well. So how do nonprofits, for example, write these grants and administer them? Or how do tribes write these grants and administer them? How do tribes grow economic development and enterprises in order to access those funds from the federal government or from the state government and employ others? So all of those are kind of the pieces on the table when we talk about how do we advance it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I certainly can relate to wanting to increase access to resources in lots of different ways, and training is a big part of that. Pushpam, close us out. Do you have any final thoughts either on the adoption of some of these inspiring nature-based solutions or just on how to motivate change and a call to action based on your perspective?
No, thanks. So one of the enduring question is how to bring finance into nature-based solution, and how to bring finance into restoration activities. As we all know, we are into even decades of restoration, that is from 2021 to 2030, and finance is the issue. So the thing which the scientific community can do, that besides providing engineering evidence, they should provide also the cost and benefit aspect, which has been discussed, but how efficient and how economically rewarding this nature-based solution could be, that case should be presented. Similarly, for the restoration, how it has double dividend benefits character, that must be exemplified. Again, nature-based solution is a too, comprehensive word. Many people try to do everything under this cover, and they say this is nature-based solution. That is fine, but a lot in terms of economic efficiency and economic benefit would depend what is the context, what kind of ecosystem services we are talking, what kind of nature's benefits we are talking. If we can organize information and provide cost benefit kind of profile of those nature-based solutions, that will be very, very good, and people can use that. Maybe producing a kind of guidance manual, maybe Chris, Kerry, and others can think about having a guidance manual in a cookbook language, that what it means and how it can be upscaled on the ground, and how people can replicate this evidence in their own context. That will go a long way in operationalizing some of the concepts which we have just discussed here. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. So with those closing comments, we're going to take a little bio break. So I want to say just a heartfelt thanks to our panelists, Pushpam, Chris, and Carrie, for sharing your expertise and time. For the audience and the panelists, don't go away. We have the second half coming, which I think you'll find very inspiring as well. So we're going to start at past. So in about 8 minutes, come on back. Dr. Faerron will get us kicked off for the next piece of the webinar. But for now, get up and stretch and get a break, and we'll talk very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Great. It's 12:30 in the afternoon here in Costa Rica. Greetings to everyone. It must be morning only still in the West Coast in the United States, and perhaps some small Pacific islands. But good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Carlos Alberto Faerron Guzman, and I'm here in representation of the Planetary Health Alliance and the University of Maryland, Baltimore, in order to moderate this second panel in this event around the triple environmental crisis. We just heard a magnificent panel from colleagues from different perspectives. And one of the things that I appreciate the most about global health, and the way I try to explain my students to global health, about global health, is that it is this combination of what happens at a high global level and how that is understood at a local level. So we had this very balanced perspectives, from high level financial to working with communities and working in local ecosystems, and how those two things correlate. And so we'll try to do that again with this panel, in which we'll have high level perspectives, but also local perspectives, and other ways of understanding our challenges. So I'll provide some framing here in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to ask each of the speakers on this panel to introduce yourselves and the parts of yourselves that you want to introduce, right? We don't present ourselves with all parts of our work during these different elements or panels or conversations that we have with the outer world. So provide any relevant information that you may wish. And two, that you manage your own slides, so share your screen as well. And just as I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share my screen in order to provide a bit of context. So for the next 7-8 minutes, I'll be doing that. So I'm sorry, Woutrina, did you say something?
Looks good. We can see your screen and it's spotlighted. Yep.
Perfect. So it's important to note that although we call this the triple environmental crisis, right? Depending on who you want to talk to, they will say, oh no, it's much more than three crises, right? There are as well other environmental crises that are happening at the same time, right? But at the same time, if you talk to someone perhaps working more from the social sciences or political sciences or from the perspectives of health systems even, they'll say there are social crises, right? And that are layered over these crises. And sometimes this has been called the poly crisis. You've heard terms as syndemics, right? That really bring together these multiple interconnected challenges that we're facing as a global community, whether it's climate change or political disruption or conflict or biodiversity loss or marine degradation or starvation, right? These things are layered together. So it's important to, yes, we're calling this the triple environmental crisis, but also keep in mind that there are other things that are happening simultaneously. And when we are thinking about the solutions that we're working towards, and that you will hear later on today, it's important to think about this interconnectivity and how we can as well work together. When we're using terms like One Health, planetary health, eco health, what we are at the core trying to do is build bridges, is provide an umbrella for a place, right? A container where we can work together without clashing, but with common goals. And I always like to explain when I show this interconnected crisis of our planetary systems, I always like to explain that we have as well multiple underlying drivers, whether it's the normalization of certain consumption patterns, whether it's tough demographic shifts that we're seeing both in aging populations, but also in rapidly growing populations, whether it's urbanization happening in middle size cities, which is happening at a alarmingly large rate without necessarily the planning and the policy and the technology accompanying that transition, whether it's agricultural practices that are harming our environment, whether it's governance failures on how we decide to organize and make decisions happening at all levels of society, right? All these things add up to this poly crisis that I was speaking about. And it's important to note that because when we're working in solutions, it's important to also think about these more underlying drivers. And I cannot talk about these underlying drivers without talking about, for me, what is the underlying reasons or the root cause, right? The image is trying to address that root cause of what is driving these multiple underlying drivers. And for me, what we're looking at is basically a crisis of values, right? So where values that are the dominant sets of values that drive these changes of desirable or non-desirable or preferred consumption patterns, or the way we make decisions, or the way we decide to use agricultural fields in ways that can be damaging for other species, talking about monocultures and such, right? So all these eventually will boil down to a set of values, which some of them I'm pointing out here, everything from short-termism to techno-optimism to materialism, with wastefulness, with greed, and not that all humans are like this, right? Because that wouldn't be an honest assessment of what's going on around the world. But definitely, it seems that these sets of value represents the people that are in power, the people that are making the decisions or delaying the necessary decisions that need to be made, right? Everything from private sector actors to state actors to those that are more at a multilateral space. So there are some of these things that are driving the changes that we're seeing. And part of how we understand how this drives, and again, we have to position ourselves that this is a global health space. We need to talk about the health impacts that this has over the world. And in the Planetary Health Alliance, in the planetary health space, we use this graph a lot to explain that, right? We use, and if you're seeing here, the environmental changes, these, interconnected crises that we just explained, are all having to the right in the red circle, health impacts, whether it's a larger degree of risk for nutritional diseases or larger exposure to infectious diseases or downstream changes that lead to changes in diet or dietary preferences that lead to non-communicable diseases, or whether it's mental health impacts. What we try to do with these integrating frameworks like One Health, Planetary Health, and others is try to understand how these things are interconnected. And when we look at this graph, one of the things I always say, we also have to look about solutions. Just as the challenge can be understood in this sequential manner, so can we understand the layers of solutions we need to work towards. So when we think about solutions, and part of what we heard earlier in the panel and what we will hear is how we frame these in win-win-win framings, right? That means how do we make these wins for our health, the health of humans? How do we make this as well wins for a better environment, wins for the, let's say, natural systems of which our health depends on and well-being? And how do we make wins as well for other forms that we value? And that might be we value equity. So how do we put equity at the forefront? Or perhaps a sector values economic growth. So how do we make sure that that is also embedded if that's the language that we're working on? And again, values will boil down here on what we consider a win-win scenario. This is also sometimes called a co-benefit approach, which we'll hear about a lot recently or in the panels to come. So when we think about these layers, right, I was talking about the sequential understanding of the problem. We need to think about the sequential understanding as well of how we think of the layers of transformation that needs to happen. Everything from the more superficial symptom level responses, things like, oh, we've cut down the forest, let's replant the forest. Or it's getting so warm, let's put direct cooling centers, right, in communities that are very warm. This is very reactive. It's necessary, but reactive. And here I want to say the important thing to think about these layers is that in an and approach, it's not an either or approach. It's always an and approach. And I think the speakers now will get to that. So whether it's symptom level responses or behavioral change, like individual shifts, like people deciding to go through meatless Mondays, or if it's more systemic, right, more about structures where we're choosing to change the rules of the game, policy, pricing, infrastructure, or whether we're going deep to solutions that look at paradigms or worldview, things like questioning the dominant assumptions of GDP as a primary metric of success, or whether we are looking at changing the foundational values that are leading to the planetary crisis. Things like rethinking what we actually cherish, moving from things like consumerism to sufficiency, from extraction to stewardship, to from dominance to reciprocity. And although the language of value is not always spoken by the people that are doing the science, I think we need to start recognizing that a lot of us are doing the science because we have a dominant worldview of values that want this better future, that want to shift these ways, this status quo. And so I urge the speakers to come as well to start thinking of how you can fit this value conversation in what you are doing. So with that in mind, I'll want to pass it on to our next speakers, and I've asked them to introduce themselves. But just so you get an overall view of what is it that we will be doing for the next couple of minutes, first I'm going to have Dr. Jonathan Patz speak first, and he will outline what is the cost of not doing anything, right? But at the same time, trying to understand what is it that we want to do that can have an important impact, not just on fixing the climate mess or the environmental mess, but what is the positive impacts that come with that action, or what he calls the consequences of action, right? And the consequences of inaction. Then Dr. Catherine Machalaba will go deeper into nature-based solutions that are grounded both in science and local realities through indigenous voices or other forms of knowing that are respected and that can be put together. And then finally, and Dr. Mark, I might not pronounce your last name correctly. I just came from the Netherlands, so perhaps my pronunciation might be correct. So I'm going to say, and then Dr. Mark Nieuwenhuizen, who will have been working in Barcelona, trying to rethink how cities can be incorporated into the framework of how we think of health. Everything from green infrastructure to air pollution to the concept of superblocks that is developed in Barcelona. So those are the three panelists you'll hear in, and I want you to think through as you are hearing them talk, right? What layer of transformation are they talking about, or what layers of transformation are they talk about? How do these solutions speak to not just the technical aspects of the solutions, but also values, right? Not just outcomes, so values, right? And how do we make these relevant to ourselves, to our own context? So I'll stop there. Thanks for again to the panelists for agreeing to do this, and a special thanks for CUGH as well for suggesting this and hosting us. So I'll stop there. John or Dr. Pats, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay. Let me get my...
We can see your screen. You'll just want to go into present mode. Yeah,
Okay, how's that look?
perfect.
Perfect.
Great, okay. So the consequences of inaction, I was handed this task, and I want to just introduce myself. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin. I've worked on climate change as a health challenge for about 30 years. I co-chaired the first National Climate Assessment Report to Congress, the co-chair for the Health Report, and served on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for about 15 years. So I've worked on climate change for a long time. So I'm going to focus on that planetary boundary, one of the 9 planetary boundaries. And of course, you can see the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. This is measuring CO2 going up over the years. And right now, sorry to say, we just continue to go up and up as we burn fossil fuels and also cut down rainforests that are the carbon sinks. But the main problem is burning too much fossil fuels. So without transitioning from fossil fuels and having inaction on getting away from burning fossil fuels, there are consequences. And we're seeing them already. Climate change is no longer in the future, it's upon us. Here you can see last year, Phoenix, 100 days of temperatures over 100 degrees. That was a record. Last year was the hottest year on record. We saw, the 2021 heat dome that had incredibly hot temperatures. They were so hot that vinyl siding was melting off of houses. The town of Linton, British Columbia, got to 121 degrees Fahrenheit and then just combusted. So that event wasn't an outlier. Yes, it was. It was so extreme that the likelihood of that happening, it was because of human-caused climate change. Now that the Earth has caused the Earth to warm 1 degree centigrade on average, that has increased the likelihood of an event that extreme by 150-fold. In other words, to have the heat dome that hot was virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. We're also seeing wildfires, not only the heat, but drought, and the combination of heat and drought is increasing the risk of wildfires. This is a study from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showing that climate change has doubled the area that's been burned in the United States, double the area of wildfires in the US, and that climate change is responsible for over half of the observed forest fuel aridity over this period of time. So yes, wildfires are complicated. There's land management, but the studies show that climate change is absolutely having a big effect on the amount of wildfires we're seeing. The health effects come from the smoke from those wildfires. And you can see in the United States, increasing amount of smoke exposure. That's a problem. We know that's a health issue, especially in children. This is a study showing that wildfire smoke exposure to young children aged 0 to 5 is especially harmful, and that wildfire smoke is actually 10 times more dangerous than other types of particulate pollution. But of course, I have to remind you, climate change, it's not just warming and droughts, it's also extremes of the other end of the water cycle. So there are droughts, but there are also floods because hot air holds more moisture. So when it rains, it rains really hard, and you get stormwater runoff and contamination. We looked at Chicago water supply, and the future for the level of intensity of rainfall is such that we'll see a doubling in the amount of combined sewage overflow events, where by design, these systems cannot handle all the rainfall, and they overflow into lakes and streams and contaminate them. But extreme flooding is also a problem with other diseases. What ends up in the emergency room after flooding are asthmatics. And imagine, basements like this or scenes like this where people are trying to clean up the mold and after a flood, very dangerous for asthmatics. Well, as far as inaction, I have to say that the current EPA proposed a rule change in something called the endangerment finding. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that there's enough scientific evidence that shows that climate change endangers human health, which forced the EPA to study that, and the EPA did, and 2 years later came out with the 2009 endangerment finding, confirming that climate change endangers health. But now the EPA, the new EPA, wants to reconsider that finding, and they're arguing that U.S. transportation emissions are insignificant at a global scale, and that there's too much scientific uncertainty to warrant managing or regulating greenhouse gas emissions. And so they came out with this draft proposal. With every draft proposal, of course, comes a public comment period. This was released in July, and with a deadline in September. So the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine came out with a rapid response consensus report that challenged the EPA's reconsideration. And at the same time, a group of over 100 climate health scientists across 31 states organized an expert working group to provide scientific evidence during the public comment period. The first issue about transportation emissions, which is the #1 sector in the United States emitting greenhouse gases, that's the U.S. in blue. The blue bar is the U.S. transportation sector, and that sector alone has more emissions than all countries' combined emissions, except for China, India, and Russia. So yes, the U.S. transportation sector, absolutely important on the world stage, causing climate warming. The other conclusion, this comes out of the National Academy report and reinforced by the expert working group, that the EPA's 2009 endangerment finding that human-caused emissions threaten human health has stood the test of time and is now reinforced by even stronger evidence. So this is evidence going against that EPA attempt to reconsider the endangerment finding. So I'll wrap up by just saying, what are the consequences of action, of transitioning away from burning fossil fuels? Well, looking at the energy sector, more than 5 million premature deaths occur every year because of burning fossil fuels. Looking at the food sector, if we got to a more sustainable diet, much less red meat, more fruits and vegetables, that would save 11 million lives every year. And if we were to design cities for people instead of just for cars and promote physical fitness by biking and walking, using mass transit and walking, we would reduce sedentary lifestyles and save another few million lives every year. So golden opportunity. I view climate action and transitioning from fossil fuels one of our greatest health opportunities. Very quickly, our group has looked at nationwide, if we were to decarbonize across sectors, what would the health benefit be? The headlines are more than 50,000 lives saved every year. And those types of studies have been happening. This is the latest National Climate Assessment Report from 2023, showing that the air quality and therefore health benefits alone exceed or significantly offset any costs of greenhouse gas reduction. So to get to clean energy, more renewables, the health benefits more than compensate for the costs. And lastly, that we're in a different age economically. Look at the price of solar energy. It's dropped 10,000 times in the last 67 years. And my colleague, Greg Nemeth, he says that pretty soon solar will become the dominant source, way over fossil fuels. So to conclude, today we have the opportunity of a lifetime to seize the moment to transition from fossil fuels, and action to decarbonize the economy will save lives in the process. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Dr. Pats, for that wonderful overview of, as well, not just things that we know and that we've known, but also things that are new and things that are a part of the emerging body of evidence that is telling us that every time there's more cost to the status quo. So hopefully, people like you still have a voice in the policy space. Definitely, you've done plenty, but if not you, newer generations of scientists that are able to speak as people say, truth to power. So I appreciate the perspectives here on climate change and the co-benefits of climate action. We're going to move it along. Dr. Machalaba, welcome. I'll leave it up for you. I've already introduced kind of what you're going to speak about. I think you heard that, so just passing it on to you.
Great, thank you. And I'm just sharing my slides. Hopefully you can just see them coming up.
Yes, we can see them. If you put them on a presenter mode, we'll see the full screen.
Great. Okay,
Great.
I think it's showing up now. Great, cool. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our esteemed panelists and the great engagement through the questions. I think that you've covered actually what I plan to cover, so that makes my job easy, but I just want to give some reflections on science, policies, and partners, including in the financing realm to advance nature-based solutions and essentially in pursuit of health in cooperation with other benefits that we need to achieve. And this is, of course, as our wonderful speakers previously have shown, because we are at this precipice where we're really entering this very dangerous space for humanity, as well as the implications for other species that we're so connected to. So I think we saw some of this in the previous presentation, but the new evidence that we are now actually reaching and now surpassing the safe operating space for 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. And of course, these are shown here separately, but they're all connected in many ways. And that's where I think the One Health and planetary health lens is really important, where we see that there are these feedback loops, we're reaching these tipping points. It's actually fundamentally changing how nature operates, how we're really changing our natural systems as we change our human systems. So we want to be in the green space. I think this is very concerning when we look at this, but also, of course, the evidence is power. We can really act on this. And then we can, of course, relate it to the human health impacts that we're seeing. And I think there are some really good studies on the burden of disease from different causes, including unhealthy environments. And we know that nearly a quarter of deaths each year are attributable to unhealthy environments. And I think from the previous presentations, we know actually if we take a broader look at our changes that interact with the environment, our food systems, the number is actually quite more concerning. So even surpassing this, and if we think about how the climate is changing and the impacts on our access to care, for example, we see that there are all of these compound and downstream effects that we really have to be aware of and taking rapid action to counteract. And then I think this is where the funding challenge comes in. And so this is specifically for adaptation funding, which is a component of climate funding. If we think about mitigation and adaptation, of course, they're very related in some ways. But we could easily swap out adaptation for biodiversity, for health. And we know that there are these ongoing shortfalls, and they're quite big. They together really total in the trillions. And I think this is certainly a challenge. We know that we're going to have trouble raising the capital needed for each of these singular agendas, but we have this opportunity as well to think in a new way to optimize these really scarce resources and do them at the scales needed, both locally, nationally, and globally for that mutual benefit and these multiple benefits. And I think there's a tendency to always call them co-benefits. I certainly have done that. I'm trying to really think differently now in terms of how we even approach these problems and the solutions and the design of the solutions, as our colleagues have so well stated, so that we really generate these multiple benefits that serve across the Sustainable Development Goals. And maybe we'll even see a totally new articulation of how those goals fit together in what comes after 2030. So I think the great news that we have really heard gives us all a sense of optimism is that nature is part of the solution. And of course, humans are part of nature, so we're all part of the solution. And there have been really good initiatives through the World Health Organization as well as other health entities to move us in the way of bridging. And I think this is happening on both sides, from the environment sector and the health sector and all of the other spheres that come into play there. And just to share these two resources that I can put in the chat, published in the last year or so from WHO and one of the WHO regional offices, that really shows these case studies of nature-based solutions generating health impacts. I think they provide a lot of inspiration. They also provide great insights on potential trade-offs and how we can help to avoid those too in the design of nature-based solutions that are in service of health and other benefits. And there are also these wonderful recommendations. So I won't read them all. They're on the screen here, and I'll share the report link, but I think they really touch on a lot of the things that we've heard in terms of the connections and a stable climate, a stable environment, youth, education, food systems, urban ecosystems, integration with public health planning, financing, redesigning transport and energy systems, equity as really a core principle, and certainly empowering Indigenous peoples, and really working together as a society to find these solutions that are really crucial and urgent, but also very powerful in terms of giving us hope, and what we can all do to play a role. So I just want to come back to nature-based solutions. We've heard a lot about what they are. I think everyone is really now an expert in relating to them, but there are some great articulations here. This is the IUCN's sort of overarching view of nature-based solutions. So we can think about them as really the green and blue infrastructure, often complementing our gray infrastructure. And they can be in pursuit of many different goals, protecting ecosystems. They could be specific issues, maybe protecting health facilities, infrastructure, reinforcement, management of ecosystems. So, the job's not done. Once you restore an ecosystem, you may need to do some management initiatives, and then also restoring initiatives, as we've seen. And these can look really different. I want to come over here in terms of the policy and funding pathways, because we might be looking at something like WASH wash improvements. So access to safe drinking water supply. And if anyone is on from South Africa, you may be really thinking of the situation in Cape Town and Durban over the past few years. And I want to point to this image here. This is a colleague who's doing invasive species removal as part of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund initiative. This is a major scale initiative. This is really restoring over 50,000 hectares of the landscape to remove this invasive species, which is very water intensive. So if you think really about that as a WASH intervention, I think it opens up a whole new suite of opportunity. And we can think about nature-based solution mainstreaming in essentially everything we're doing. I think there's probably a link, when we look at maternal and child health with malaria risk, for example, and nutrition access. When we think about One Health national strategies, the role of nature-based solutions, if we're thinking about safeguards, and there was an important report that recently came out from the World Bank and really stressing the need to consider the trade-offs as we do the planning of new development priorities. But I think also there, as a complement to the safeguards, that opportunity window of what are the co-benefits, the multiple benefits. So thinking more broadly and certainly working towards that right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So essentially, any plan that you're working with, any funding pathway that you're thinking of, I think there's a role for nature-based solutions in some way. Now, at the Nature Conservancy, we're looking very closely across all of our different initiatives. I don't have time to run through all of them, but just to say that, something like peatland restoration, there's a wildfire risk reduction opportunity there in terms of the direct fire attack risk, the carbon sequestration, the smoke and haze events that we've seen in Southeast Asia. So really thinking upstream and the value of nature-based solutions to tackle some of these major challenges. Protecting critical health infrastructure, mangrove and coral reef restoration and protection, that really key role that our existing ecosystems play that we need to protect, and then also restoring. And I just want to highlight here the last one, community conservation and indigenous stewardship. To me, this is a nature-based solution for health. We can certainly think about traditional medicines and the reliance on them, the biodiversity value of them too, and really the therapeutic value for the communities that have stewarded them and potentially for the rest of the world. And I think these are really core to being enabling conditions for conservation and our collective future well-being too. Now, very briefly, this is some work in Kenya, and you can see here, this is just after one rainfall, the road is really becoming insurpassable. And you can imagine if you're a mother pregnant going to the hospital, it's a very urgent situation. This is a real challenge. And so if you can imagine during the rainy season, this is of course compounded, and it can become very physically dangerous to really go anywhere, that connectivity to medical resources. So I think these partnerships here, and I love this image of our partners at the Nature Conservancy and the Ministry of Health and a local NGO, Communities Health Africa Trust, really providing last mile service. You can see here some of the tents. There's family planning initiatives. There's really the key connectivity to the health system, and really recognizing that's an entry point for engagement in ecosystem protection as well, and making sure that people are benefiting from conservation measures, part of it, and able to really have their full potential by being healthy for their community today and tomorrow. Now, this is in Zambia just a few months ago, these beautiful places that we really can't have without the people that empower the stewardship of them. And I want to highlight rangers here, and specifically World Female Ranger Week. You can see this slogan, supporting women, saving biodiversity. These rangers are incredibly powerful in terms of their role in ecosystem protection. They're also mothers, sisters, children in their communities, and really playing a role in how people relate to nature and seeing the value and also the economic opportunity as a ranger. Youth, we've heard about the students really celebrating the World Female Ranger Week and starting to see, okay, here's what a healthy ecosystem looks like, and that management of shared resources, and really seeing the role that we can all play in that. Now, just to close, I want us to all really think about the planetary health workforce. And we may imagine nurses, doctors, hydrologists. I think we're hearing more from the presentations today. You know, there's a role for tree planting. I think we can really look across all of the different workforces we need, and rangers are a very important part of that workforce. If we think about the global target under the Global Biodiversity Framework of protecting 30% of the world's lands, oceans, and freshwater, we see that there's really a need to ramp up our ranger workforce. And they're on the front lines, they're complementing community health workers, community animal health workers, paraveterinarians, nurses, and really that shared responsibility, collective action, and also the information that needs to transcend different sectors so we can all stay healthy. Now, just to close here, I think that there's also some concerning findings that we have to be aware of in our work. And so we know the key role that Indigenous populations play in stewarding our ecosystems, and we also can't take this for granted. And I think that this is really important, where we look at the pressures that are still facing these communities, and the role of Indigenous governance to really reduce conversion risk from these healthy ecosystems, and the supporting ecosystem functions, and then really the consequences that can result when we don't protect those populations and ecosystems. And I think to help us do that, we also have to be very aware that engaging in Indigenous health, you know, there may be different frameworks, different terminologies, different values and priorities. And I think there's great work from the Indigenous Determinants of Health Alliance to help us do that. So I just want to encourage everyone to take a look at this. This is just a brief part of the equivalence chart that they've prepared, but I think it's incredibly helpful, especially when we're looking at ways that we can best be allies if we're not part of those Indigenous populations themselves. Now, I just want to close that I think healthy communities are at the core of thriving nature, livable climate. You know, we are part of these ecosystems, and we can really, I think, take pride in the opportunities that are available to have a future generation that is healthy, both for the ecosystems, the other species, and our own families. So I think that gives me a lot of hope in terms of what is possible. And I want to thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Catherine. That was great. I always enjoy hearing you speak, and I always highlight the fact that if someone is imagining, oh, how can I work better with the, you know, conservation people or the people that are working more from the environmental side, I think you are a person that could easily respond and make those connections that weren't easily made. And having someone be a planetary health, let's say, person within an organization like the Nature Conservancy is just of so much value. It tells us how the bridges are being built within these large organizations and how to connect these two things. And it struck me that I think the next speaker is a nice balance to what you were saying. And as I was seeing the landscapes of the photos and the examples you were sharing, it might be distant to a lot of us, right? To a lot of people that are in the audience, especially because they look as environments that are rural or that are, you know, quote unquote, a lot of them national parks or very, you know, thick or lush nature. And most of the world lives in cities, and I think most of the people that are connected here likely live in cities. So being able to connect those two things is vital, right? Not necessarily just the environment that surrounds me is what determines my health, but even things happening thousands of miles away, like the places where you do the work, really determine whether I have good water, good air, good food on my plate, and making those connections is ever more important. So I appreciate always your perspective, and I want to thank you for bringing them, and thank you for all the work that you're doing at TNC. So thank you. I'm sure there will be questions, and just a reminder of the people that are listening that if you do have questions, you can start writing them in the chat. I'm going to collect them as if not, I've prepared some questions that I've not shared with the panelists in order to make them think off the cuff, which I enjoy things more off the cuff. Now we're going to move to Dr. Mark. You're going to grade my pronunciation in a second. So as I said, we're going to move into more of a city landscape, and hopefully that is a good complement to what we heard from Dr. Machalaba. All right, Dr. Mark, I open it up for you, and thanks again for joining us. I know in your busy schedule.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Well, you did my surname quite well. I mean, I think you spent your time quite well in the Netherlands. So yes, a little bit now to the urban environment. I'm a professor at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, and I focus predominantly around my work is on cities, climate action, and health. So I'll give a few examples of some of the work that we've done within that area. First of all, I would like to mention again, I think as we mentioned before, that we have many health benefits of urban green infrastructure. I mean, we know it reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, makes the air cleaner, less noise, promotes particular physical activity, improves cognitive functioning and mental health. Of children and also the elderly, and it also particularly decreases the heat island effects, which receives quite a bit of an attention lately as well. Overall, we see a reduced rate of premature mortality in areas that are greener compared to where there is less green. There are a number of pathways for this, why we see this health benefits. I won't go into them at the moment. I mean, there's a nice paper by Jana Markovic on this, and explains some of the underlying mechanisms that how green space, the use of green space, can actually lead to better health and well-being. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that throughout the world, we see actually less and less green space in our cities. And at the same time, we also see temperatures increasing in cities, particularly this urban heat island effect, what we're seeing, where the city centers of cities are much warmer than surrounding areas. So it's actually an opposite trend of what we actually would like to see. Given that already more than 50% of the population lives in cities and soon is going up to about 70%, it's very important to pay attention to this, and try to reverse this trend wherever it's possible. A few years ago, we did a study in nearly 1,000 European cities. And what we found was that in those nearly 1,000 cities, 60% of the population had insufficient access to green space as defined by the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization says that everyone should be living within 300 meters of a green space of at least 1 hectare. Most people actually didn't. I mean, in particular, if you go to city centers, often there's not much green space around. We also estimated that because of this lack of green space, there are 43,000 premature deaths each year in the cities, in those particular cities in Europe. That if you want to know a little bit more about the specific cities, there's a website, globalranking.org, where you can see which cities were most affected. So it's time to do something in our cities and start screening. And now one of the positive things, I must say, what I see like in Europe is that many cities have actually put policies in place for greening. I mean, partly because of health reasons, partly because of livability, and partly because to address the climate crisis. Now, ideally, what we would like to have, I think, would be kind of these lovely parks. I mean, if you look at this, like this picture, I mean, you would like to be there straight away, and you feel much more relaxed, and you can imagine walking around there. It's wonderful. Of course, there's often not so much space for that in cities. I mean, we have some wonderful old parks. I mean, and we need to keep them, but actually building a new park like this would take a long time, and space may not be actually there. So we need to look at creating other spaces within our cities. And one example that has been tried here in Barcelona is the so-called superblock. In Barcelona, we have a grid system for a large part of the city. Traffic goes up and down, left and right, which you see at the top picture on the left. The idea of a superblock is to cut 4 junctions in some block of 9 and add more green space to there, and also only allow active transportation like walking and cycling. So motorized transport goes around the block. Originally, 502 superblocks were envisaged in Barcelona, and you can see an example of one of them, what was introduced here in Sant Antoni, which is here the top picture. On the left side was before, and then on the right side after. Unfortunately, of the 502, only 3 have been implemented so far, as what we have. But we did a health impact assessment to study, see what would be the health benefits if we would introduce all the 502. And we estimated that you could prevent almost 700 deaths per year in Barcelona. As what you can see, part of them come from green space, what was one of the interests, to prevent 60 deaths, but also larger impacts were actually, benefits were because of the reduction of air pollution that comes with it, because you have less traffic within the superblock itself, and also the noise reduction and the heat reduction. So you can see, if we would introduce all the superblocks, we would have great health benefits in the city. And unfortunately, they were not implemented as such. But what was implemented to some extent was what I call superblock light, what is a kind of pedestrianization of streets and greening of streets within the very middle of the city, the example area in Barcelona. And that was done a few years ago, where you can see on the top picture on the top right what was a street before, very car dominated. Barcelona is very car dominated, and at the bottom some pictures of what it looks after. These are artist drawings, but in principle it also looks like that. We did a health impact assessment, also looking at what would be the health benefits in terms of better mental health, and we found that you could, reduce the mental health indicators related to mental health between 8 and 14%. It's going from self-perceived mental health to actually visits to a psychologist and psychiatrist or antidepressant use. And these numbers, when you put them in actual numbers, are quite large, because you're talking between 10 and 30,000 people that are affected and would have better mental health as a result. Finally, what we see in many cities is introducing more green space to reduce the urban heat island effect. That's what I said, where you have the center of the city warmer than surrounding areas. And we did a study where we looked at what is the current summer mortality related to urban heat islands, and we estimated that 4% of summer mortality in Europe, in these European cities, is attributable to this urban heat island effects, and that if you would increase the current tree cover from 15% in the cities to 30%, we would reduce the urban heat island effect by about 1.3 degrees Celsius and prevent about a third of the attributable deaths related to this urban heat island effects. So you can see here again, getting in more green would improve the city environment and prevent deaths as such. Now, what we also seen in Europe, particular, is this new kind of green space rule that Professor Cecil Konijnendijk came up with a few years ago, where the idea is that people should be able to see free trees from their window, live in an area with 30% tree cover, and live within 300 meters of a green space of at least a half hectare. This is quite an aspirational rule, but it's been picked up by many cities, and they try to achieve this, because it's easy for people to imagine. We did an epidemiological study here in Barcelona a few years ago, but we found that only 6% of people were actually achieving this rule, because Barcelona is a very compact city. There is not so much space for green space. It's very car dominated. So it's actually, it's not so easy to introduce green unless you, as what I just showed before, take away the car infrastructure, road space, and put in green. We also found that mental health indicators related to this, including medication use, psychologists, psychiatrists use, was reduced by between 23 and 76% for people that actually were achieving this rule compared to people that didn't. So you see great benefits of living in this area with a 330-300 green space rule. But unfortunately, we don't see too often that, you know, health is the driver for urban planning. I mean, too many times other things are taken into account, and I think it's important that health becomes the driver for urban planning, and that we should put health at the center, and that we should actually, you know, whenever we do some urban planning, transport planning, that health should be the main driver behind this. That. Now you wonder, you know, are these changes possible? I just want to give a few examples where these things actually happened. I mean, I think they're quite well known, but they're also very powerful. This is in South Korea, in Seoul, where they had a big motorway running through the city. They took the motorway away and built a river area, a canal, a smaller road, more green space. A wonderful example how an environment can change from quite detrimental to much more beneficial. Another well-known example here, Düsseldorf. Germans love their car. I mean, that's but they took the space away from the car and made a nice blue and green space area. And then in my own city, in Barcelona, this was a big roundabout. The entry to the city distributed the cars to different places in the city. They actually tore it down. What you can see, they were doing some work on it at the bottom right picture. And when you go there nowadays, you actually find a very nice park that's being used by many people. The cars are going now underground. They also made the road space much smaller for the cars, so less cars can actually enter the city. So overall, we get a much nicer city in that way, also with this wonderful green space that people really enjoy. If you want to read a bit more about some of the solutions, I could only do a few minutes. I mean, I wrote a paper in The Lancet last year around the theme climate crisis, cities and health, with many more examples. And there is also a video related to that. So I encourage you to have a look if you want to see more examples also for other cities. And then finally, I would like to thank my team that are doing all the hard work here. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, if you want to know a little bit more, I'm leading a project, UBD Policy, where we look at the burden of disease in 1,000 cities in Europe, with much more information on this.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. That was a great overview of how basically cities we can reimagine cities as well. Just some of the challenges that are emerging from this space, and even perhaps resistance in this space. And perhaps that's where I'd like to start my moderated discussion here. And if I could ask the panelists to come on board. Let's see if everyone's on board. Dr. Machalaba and Dr. Pat. And Ian, can you please spotlight everyone so we're all in front and center? Thanks for that. So perhaps because you mentioned this example of the super blocks, and you had planned a couple of dozens of them, and only 3 have been implemented, I can imagine there is resistance. And similar, John, you were talking about, you know, backtracking, even not just resistance, but sometimes even backtracking in some of the goals. So I can imagine you are or have been put in front of decision makers, of people that are in a sense in charge of moving the agenda forward and not really doing it. So when it comes down to thinking about resistance on getting to the place we need to be, perhaps some of you can share what is the greatest resistance that you've seen in order to implement some of these integrated health center solutions, whether it's political or cultural or institutional or economic. And once you think about that resistance based on your experience, again, if you can think of recommendations for the audience on how do we overcome this resistance. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Can I mention, because you mentioned the super block, and actually the reason why not many more super blocks were implemented was there was a change of mayor.
The previous mayor we had in Barcelona was very much in favor of the superblock, did great work, started them. And then there was an election coming up, and there were other candidates, and this new candidate went against this kind of idea from, oh, we don't want to restrict traffic in the city center because this is economic prosperity. We need to have cars running around. And unfortunately, this particular new mayor won by about 300 votes. It was a very small, but took power and said, we don't want to talk about superblocks anymore. Forget about it. That's it. And there was this kind of simple political change. I think if we stuck to the previous mayor, we would have just continued. But because this mayor doesn't want anything to do with the previous mayor, we don't have this. And, one of the things I think what I mentioned is often that they want to have more economic prosperity in a way. And the idea is often the more cars you have running around, the more economic prosperity, the more economic activity there is, the better it is for the city. And of course, that's not true. But it's not so easy to convince people of this. I mean, that I think many cities have been buying into it. I mean, you see in many cities around Europe, they're reducing car use in the city center, trying to stimulate, put in more cycling lanes, put more other infrastructure to get people to walking around, putting in more greening. But unfortunately, in my own city, this has come to a standstill. So I'm just waiting for the next election, and hopefully the next candidate will lead again and say, these super blocks were a great idea. Let's continue. I mean, we have some of the highest car density per square kilometer in Barcelona because it's a very compact city, and it's just ridiculous. Cities are not made for cars. I mean, cities are made for people. I mean, and we should make them nice for cities and not for cars.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. It seems that the reason seems to be both political and economic, but there's a paradox in that economic argument that perhaps at the moment or in the future can be better outweighed, right? And I'm sure someone in your team is a health economist that's measuring the benefits, not just the reduction in costs of the health system of air pollution and these early preventable deaths, right? But also the economic prosperity that can come from a walkable city, what that means for economic prosperity. And so there seems to be kind of a mismatch of indicators of success, a mismatch on what we prioritize as well. So that's an interesting
Yeah, I think it's these urban myths that are going around still, and so it takes a while to get it out. I mean, because there's good evidence that if you pedestrianize streets, you have a higher retail sale and whatever. It's good for economy, and but that there's still people trying. They're not caught up with that. I mean, in research, we're much further ahead than in politics, I think. I mean, and so it's lacking in this. In particular, the current mayor, I think, where he comes from, is part. Is still thinking in these old models, unfortunately, that and we haven't been able to convince him as such.
Well, that last sentence, we haven't been able to convince him. I think that just raises a bar for us as well. So I know, Dr. Patsy, opened up your mic. Did you want to?
I'll just say, in the United States, definitely, if you think about economics and politics, the economics of renewables globally has radically changed. 2019 was the first time that the cheapest way to generate electricity was from renewables and batteries. So now, as far as the political argument that we can't afford clean energy, that no longer exists. And around the world, solar is just taking off. Now, coming to the politics, unfortunately, Barcelona had a new mayor. And in the United States, of course, the past administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, the largest climate investment ever, $370 billion over 10 years, to really advance renewables and get away from fossil fuels. And it is, sad and remarkable in a bad way how the new administration is completely upending and reversing all of these financial incentives, taking them away, stopping projects. Now, it's still in play. They try to shut down this project, the wind project off of Rhode Island that was 80% complete. They shut it down, but it's now the courts have overturned that, and so that's still going. They're one of the largest solar projects in the world in the Nevada desert. They've just pulled the permits for that, and if that shuts down, so their politics can be really bad and undo things. So, yes, economics is one thing, but right now the political scene in the United States is really going against the economic interest because it's very one-sided. It's the interest only of fossil fuels and not of people's electric bills and things like that. So definitely these are and so there are ways to step up against that. And so a lot of scientists are stepping up and speaking truth to power and talking about, well, let's talk about the dollars and cents. This is crazy to keep the coal-fired power plant going for another 2 years when it's too expensive to do it. So there are a lot of people. And then I'll just end by saying, in this political era in the U.S. where there's stagnation nationally, pivoting to local has been really, the way to go. I can tell you that in the state of Wisconsin, the state legislature is moving ahead on things. So things can happen locally and that can really disseminate and go broadly in a positive way.
Well, thanks for as well speaking out, and hopefully most of you are not in a wait and see kind of position and are actively trying to get these things in front of the voters and decision makers at the United States. And Dr. Machalaba, for you, perhaps, do you have something to add around where you've seen resistance and how to overcome it? It seems that the United States have a combination of political, cultural, economic, institutional, right? And for you, for your experience, how about you?
Yeah, I think that, change doesn't happen overnight, but a lot of changes add up. And I think that's what gives me a lot of hope about the entry points really are at many levels, right? And who can make a difference and how the Convention on Biological Diversity, a UN Convention for Biodiversity, the US has never been they've never fully ratified the participation there. So I think the fact that there's so much global collaboration toward that, and the US has participated in many ways and supported a lot of work. And down the street there's a church and community center that's working towards that 30 by 30 target. So things can happen even if they don't happen at certain levels, and I think there's a lot of power in that. Even on universities, the greening of universities, the pollinator gardens, all of these things that can really add up. And I think that conservation is incredibly popular with voters. There was even if we don't call it that, and maybe that's that communication piece that we really have to get better at, but there was a recent report from the World Bank that it was a really stunning statistic. I think it was like 90% of people in the world are facing one of 3 degraded ecosystem conditions that cause either extensive wildfires and smoke, water shortages, water scarcity, and flooding risk and extreme heat. And I think, we're all impacted. There's obviously inequitable impacts that we really have to be attending to, but we can't hide from the reality of these crises. And I think at the end of the day, people don't want extreme heat in their cities. They want to have cooling, shade. They want to have recreational areas. They don't want to be breathing in the smoke from fires. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of that support, that we all care about our health. And even if we don't think we care about conservation, if we care about our health, there is always that entry point at whatever level. I think preparing the conditions, hopefully, for that large scale political action and financing. But I think the proof of concept through sometimes the smaller, more local interventions that really do add up and show that change is possible.
No, I appreciate that. And I want to kind of address that last point and perhaps move to my next question. And again, just a reminder to the people still listening that if you have any questions, and thanks for staying for the majority of the time here. If you have questions, you can I put them in the chat. I do want to kind of address, because again, the way I see the work you're all doing, whether it is a municipal or high level policy or multilateral space, you're all interfacing this in science and in narrative and with the decision maker. So if possible, can you think of one moment in this work that you do where you were trying to convince a set of actors or an actor, stakeholders, right, to change their mind, and you successfully did that, or a group that you worked for or with successfully did that, and kind of what did it take? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I want hopefully people to hear that are listening to this, that, oh, there is ways and there are things that we need to think about a little bit outside the box, perhaps on how we usually tell the narrative of health, multiple benefits or co-benefits or, win-win solutions, but a lot of the time that's not enough. So just think about that for a second. How did you manage to create, or how did your group, or a good example of that changing a perspective or changing a person's minds? And it's not always the most rational ways that we change our mind. Of course, policymakers are not the most rational people. So who wants to start there?
Now, some of them
Go ahead.
are,
Go
I
ahead.
think, and others are not. I mean, you want to go, Catherine?
Please go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah. I think one of the things where you make a little bit of a distinction between kind of politicians and policy makers. I mean, they're not always exactly the same. I mean, the politicians have a base where they're running, and then more the decision makers under the more the technical, that they are a bit more rational, I find. I mean, at the moment, the political level, I mean, there's not much rationality. It's a lot of emotion and trying to get creating some fuss. But kind of a success story, what we've seen here in Europe over the last few years, is the new Ambient Air Quality Directive. What was a very kind of successful effort to reduce the current air quality standards. We were relatively higher than in the US, and try now to get them to a relatively decent level, but reduces quite a bit of the burden of disease. But it took a lot of effort. I mean, bringing in different groups together, a number of scientists, people doing the research, writing, also organizations like the European Respiratory Society that were very involved in trying to bring the case from different angles to the more technical people, but also the European Parliament, the European Commission, etc., to bring forward the arguments that actually, if you take action now, you can prevent a lot of disease, you can prevent a lot of costing. So here again, I mean, the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of action now. And that was actually bought in by many stakeholders. Of course, there was already an ongoing trend that air pollution levels were going down. And so I guess many people that saw that if we wait a bit long enough, then we go down. We all know that air pollution is bad. We need to bring it down. But having this new directive, I think it was a success story, or I call it the biggest public health intervention we've had for a generation here in Europe. So, and it prevents a lot of disease and also a lot of premature deaths.
And part of what I'm hearing there is kind of what it took. Obviously, there was some part of it that was on the, let's say, demand side of hearing this information. You mentioned the EC, the European Parliament, and whatnot, but it also took a strong network of people working together in a coordinated fashion in order to be able to speak the science, speak the numbers, to speak. So kind of the importance of working in networks is something that I'm hearing in from your European
And there was
context.
a window of opportunity as well that, you know, there were kind of politically, in a way, we're an environment.
Yeah.
Probably if we would do it now, it would be more difficult, actually, because the
Mhm.
agendas have moved on. It's all about competition. And unfortunately, the Trump government doesn't help so much us at the moment. So even we're affected here in Europe. So, but yes,
Sure.
I mean, it's a concerted effort, you know, people coming together and from different angles pushing this.
Dr. Machalaba, and perhaps you, and then if Dr. Pat has something to say, we have like 3 minutes left.
Yeah, just to say that I think groups like this, you know, CUGH bringing us together, the Planetary Health Alliance, I think it's so important. And you know, there's a need for this education at all levels. And I'm learning every day. You know, I think that each nature-based solution can look so different. Each context that it can be implemented in can look so different. I was really struck when I was in northern Kenya with our colleagues there, and the way that they were doing the outreach on One Health, you know, with the picture book and under the shade of the tree. And so you sort of see that connection of, oh, if you don't have that tree, you don't have a convening space that's really safe for people to sit in the hot sun, you know, in drought conditions. And so sort of that as an enabling condition to really learn about these connections and engage with them. I see Jill Rathman from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine is on. You know, she's doing a lot with village health workers and that One Health Planetary Health engagement. So I think these resources, as we have them and as we can share them and what's working well and what do we have to be aware of, I think it's really powerful in terms of giving that inspiration and getting the message out to everyone in the ways that it can be beneficial and relevant to the context.
I appreciate that education is important to all, especially for someone coming from the education background. I work a lot of in education, and I do think we need education at all levels, but especially on, as Mark was differentiating here, policymakers and politicians, especially politicians that work more at an emotional level. They need to hear this from people they trust. They need to hear them from stakeholders that have been historically at the forefront of these discussions. So sometimes it's who is transmitting the message or the of education message that we need to rethink. It's not always the scientists that they'll trust the most. So kind of rethinking about that. And that's what I heard from what you were saying. And Dr. Batz, I'll give you the final word if you want to comment on this or something that I've been commenting on. And then we'll close it, pass it on to Woutrina.
I keep it very short and just a reminder that the best communication first starts with great listening. So just you really need to know where the audience is and what they're concerned about as a starting point for any communication. So I'll just end with that obvious reminder. That's all.
It's not so obvious. Sometimes we go into the room and not do anything but listen. We just speak, speak, speak. So I appreciate that. It's a great reminder to have every day, very related to mindfulness and just being aware of the surroundings. And sometimes listening is what's required. Thank you for that. It's a great way to finish. Appreciate everyone's attention. Dr. Smith, Woutrina, pass it on to you to close up the space. And thanks for everyone for your patience and your participation. Bye. To the panelists, thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't want to keep us on here too long. I just want to extend my thanks on behalf of CUGH, as Keith would want, and also for all of us who were involved in planning this particular webinar. It was a chance to come together around a lot of the very current topics that are present in the triple environmental crisis or triple planetary crisis. So we were able to explore not just some of the problems, but some of the solutions, which I think is really timely and important. And we are a global society, which is critical in so many ways, for good and for bad, as we heard about. So one thing that we want to keep in mind for the timing of this webinar is some of the ideas and findings can feed into some upcoming meetings that will be happening in France. And so wanting to just recognize that it's always important to make time to share ideas and inspire and move forward. But this is quite strategic. And so was going to feed into what will be happening in Lyon, I think, in a few weeks. So that's wonderful. Some of the things that we heard about from our experts around the world were ranging from the frameworks and economics to specific case studies of nature-based solutions and other approaches to build resilience. We had folks from many, many different countries logged in to be able to really think about what are some of the current ideas and how do we build that going forward. Consortium of Universities for Global Health will be having a virtual Global Health Week, free to all, that will be happening a little bit later this fall, and then an in-person conference in Washington, D.C. in the spring, in March or April, as I recall. So there are chances to keep things going asynchronously on email with those of us who have been involved in some of these ideas and are happy to be connectors or catalysts for continuing the discussions. And then thanks, Ian and Elizabeth, for putting the links in the chat there for folks who would like to learn more about those additional consortium of universities for global health events that will be happening in the fall in a virtual way, and then in the spring in an in-person context, has been very successful in the past. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. I think I speak for probably all the panelists when we say we're happy if folks would like to reach out by email or be able to have follow-up discussions. That's no problem. That's why we do these things. And if there are additional ideas that come forward, we certainly can loop back as a group. So have a good day, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, and we will all hope to talk to you very soon.